ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس لعلهم يتذكرون. ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس لعلهم يتذكرون.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters. Welcome to another episode of Quranic Parables, Amthalul Quran, where we go through a parable from the Quran during this blessed month of Ramadan. Hope you are all well and in good health and good spirits. Welcome to another episode. Please like and share this video with others, so they can also join in and take the benefits from the ayats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As usual, I have my guest, Ustad Saf. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam, Ustad. Alhamdulillah wa barakatuh.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm right.
Yeah, very good, mashallah. So as usual, brothers and sisters, we start off gently or with a reminder or two about the virtues of the Quran. So Ustad Saf, I don't have anything particular tonight.
Unfortunately, myself included, Ustad. I come with an empty hand.
Okay, inshallah. So I think, we will try to make that up for tomorrow.
Make that up tomorrow, inshallah.
So let's go to our Amthal for tonight. Let me just share the screen. So tonight we have very interesting Amthal from Surah Al-A'raf, Surah number 7. And there's two verses, they're interconnected, which we'll read and then we'll translate, inshallah ta'ala, and then we can actually go into it. Let's listen to the beautiful recitation first.
واتل عليهم نبأ الذي آتيناه آياتنا فانسلخ منها فأتبعه الشيطان فكان من الغاوين ولو شئنا لرفعناه بها ولكنه أخلد إلى الأرض واتبع هواه فمثله كمثل الكلب إن تحمل عليه يلهث أو تتركه يلهث ذلك مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآياتنا فاقصص القصص لعلهم يتفكرون.
صدق الله العظيم. So in translation, from verse number 175, and recite to them, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the news of him to whom we gave knowledge of our signs, but he detached himself from them. So Satan pursued him and he became of the deviators. And if we had willed, we could have elevated him thereby, but he adhered instead to the earth and followed his own desire. So his example is like that of the dog. If you chase him, he pants. If you leave him, he still pants. That is the example of the people who denied our signs. So relate the stories that perhaps they will give thought. So this couple of ayats are incredibly scary ayats, especially regarding ilm and knowledge, which we'll go into details tonight. Now, just, scouring through the books of tafsir, many narrations have mentioned, and although it's not mentioned in the verse, that these verses are referring to an alim, a scholar from the people of Banu Israel. In one narration, it mentioned that Musa alayhi salam, he sent one of these scholars from Banu Israel to a ruler or to a king, and then to invite that king to the truth, and then that king effectively offered him money and wealth and position and status, and he effectively sold his deen for the dunya. That is like the backdrop to this story, and there's different narrations regarding it. But I think what is important is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not mention name and place, so we won't dwell on it too much. So these two verses, inshallah ta'ala, we want to look into. So I think before we just go into the amthal itself, I think it's worthwhile just pondering on the first verse, 175, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ الَّذِي آتَيْنَاهُ آيَاتِنَا. O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, recite unto them the news of him to whom we gave our signs. فَأَنْسَلَخَ مِنْهَا. But he detached himself from them. And what it was interesting when I was looking into the word that's being used here, the word that's been mentioned, which is فَانْسَلَخَ. In terms of it's an interesting usage of word that's been mentioned here. So Ibn Ashur rahimahullah, he mentioned that as-salkh is izalatul jild al-haywan al-mayti an jasadihi, wastu'ira fil ayati lil-infisal al-ma'nawi. So he mentioned the meaning of salkh is like a shedding of the skin of the dead skin of the animal from its body. Like, for example, a snake, it sort of sheds its skin, and it's been borrowed here for the verses to indicate this metaphysical separation, this conceptual separation from the ayats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's interesting imagery already that Allah is mentioning, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's given these ayats, these signs, which is the revelation, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to a particular person, which these signs effectively covered him, like how a skin covers the animal, and then the imagery that's been mentioned here is that particular person is shed that skin, if you like, these verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His deen was only sort of kind of skin deep. It was just on the outside that didn't really have any impact on his inner being, or in his soul, or in his heart. So I thought that's an interesting use of language, Sadsaf.
But it's also interesting you mentioned that, because also the grammatical form, what form is it? فَإِنْ سَلَخَ مِنْهَا. And Allah didn't say فَسَلَخْنَاهُ مِنْهَا. Allah said فَإِنْ سَلَخَ مِنْهَا. And the reason why the Mufassirun say that is because لأنه هو الذي تسبب إلى انسلاخه منها باتباع هواه. So Allah is attributing action to the culprit.
Absolutely.
So
he's the one taking the decision to shed himself from the ayats.
That's right.
From Allah subhanahu wa
ta'ala. That the snake, as you mentioned, sheds its skin.
So it's an interesting language that's just
definitely
used in terms of the imagery. Then فَأَتْبَعَهُ الشَّيْطَانِ, and immediately this fa is used again, immediately shaitan pursues him, follows him. It seems that from the sort of immediate reading, these ayats are protection for the believers. The knowledge, the ilm, there's a protection from shaitan. It protects you from that. As soon as you shed that, then you are open to the whispers and the suggestions of shaitan, and shaitan then goes after you. فَأَتْبَعَهُ, he follows you, pursues you, and then subsequently فَكَانَ مِنَ الْغَاوِينَ, as a result of that you become one of those who are deviated. So it's the interesting tertib here, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you knowledge and ilm and revelation through which you should benefit. But if you shed that knowledge, those ayats from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then shaitan will, whisper to you and will follow you and chase you. And then you will be definitely of those who have deviated. So this is a case of somebody who started off as a believer, started off, at least on the outwardly, as a believer, as a mu'min, as a worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, he took the turn of towards the path of misguidance, and shaitan got him. And that's why I say it's very scary for people like me, you, and others who are trying to be, worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are seeking knowledge every day of the book of Allah and the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this ayah just points out to the deadly dangers that awaits people, who are claiming to be Muslims, practicing Muslims, trying to be muttaqeen, that we are not spared from the whispers of shaitan.
Definitely. I mean, we're vulnerable once we let go of Allah's guidance. And this is going to be one of the reflection points, but I'll anticipate it now. Once we shed Allah's guidance, once we recoil from it, we're vulnerable. And shaitan is ready, like a predator, to jump on the prey. It's interesting you mentioned, I know we haven't got to the simile component yet, but on the point of knowledge, وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَرَفَعْنَاهُ بِهَا, the Mufassirun say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that الرفع عنده ليست بمجرد العلم. So just because you have knowledge, it doesn't automatically raise your rank. Raising someone's rank stays with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's his prerogative, whether he wants to raise someone or not. So the ulama, they have knowledge, but it doesn't automatically mean you're going to be exalted. Your knowledge doesn't automatically take you up into a high sort of, that is up to Allah if he wants to raise your rank.
But the sabab is being mentioned here, the potential cause, biha, because of it.
Yeah, but it has to be اتباع الحق.
Yes.
It has to be اتباع الحق وإيثاره. It has to be following the truth and preferring it, which is obviously, Allah's pleasure. So there's a condition with the knowledge. It's scary. It is
very scary. Inshallah, let's go into it, inshallah, because here the following verse, which is وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَرَفَعْنَاهُ بِهَا وَلَكِنَّهُ أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ, etc. Let's go from that, the second verse, and then we can get to the amthal, the comparison that's been made, inshallah. So tafaddal.
So we see here that Allah, from this beautiful verse, what are the components? Well, here the mushabbah is those, whether it's the Quran, it's the truth, the people of truth, whatever it might be. الَّذِي آتَيْنَهُ آيَاتِنَا. So those who receive Allah's truth, the mushabbah bihi is who? What are they likened to? Well, a panting dog, and you can see the picture there.
Yes, you got a picture at the bottom. Yeah.
So a panting dog. كَمَثَلِ الْكَلْبِ. Yeah, there it is. There's a line. So I just got it read there. إِن تَحْمِلَ عَلَيْهِ يَلْهَثْ وَتَتْرُكُهُ يَلْهَثْ. Okay, so the liken to we got كَمَثَل is the particle, and the wajhu shabah, the simile feature, can be number one of these things: lowliness, futility, despicability, things like that. So they're highlighted in red there.
It's just before we go into it, the imagery, the top one, I just did a search on Google of hedonistic behavior.
And that's how it was, yeah, in like what, Edwardian times? Where did you get it from?
Yeah, I think this is like to do with Epicurean philosophy, because I think they advocated hedonistic way of life. So this what actually came up with just, enjoying life, the dunya.
It looks like how some people are enjoying life in lockdown. I don't know if it's in the park. That's what they've been doing.
Absolutely. So yeah, so you got that in terms of representing, akhlada ila al-ardi wattaba'a hawlahu. And then in terms of the dog, which is panting, is you can see a dog with his tongue out. So hopefully those two imageries they sort of work. But anyway, let's go through the verse point by point, I guess. So we already mentioned وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَرَفَعْنَاهُ بِهَا.
Yeah, and Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, he said, because of this, هذه الآية من أشد الآيات على أهل العلم إذ مالوا عن العلم إلى الهوى. So when a scholar, this is one of the most severest and harshest verses against the people of knowledge if they incline to the whims and the desires. So it's a very, very serious matter, very serious matter. So rifa'ah, or elevation, is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He alone elevates. Just merely having knowledge is not sufficient.
And also, I think there are many verses also talking about the one of the means of elevation is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned places in the Quran, يَرْفَعُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ
That's right.
وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ دَرَجَاتٍ. So one of the ways by which Allah elevates people are those whom Allah has given knowledge. So here, and again, I think in terms of coming back to I think the next verse itself, وَلَكِنَّهُ, however, أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ. It's interesting use of language again. أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ, which is from khulud, permanency.
Yeah, you get that in فَيَحْسَبُ أَنَّهُ مَا لَهُ أَخْلَدَ.
Yeah, permanency. So أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ, he's sort of like permanently clinging onto the earth, into dunya.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Already you can see the traits, of this person, even despite being given knowledge. وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ.
And following his
Allah. So the mukhalafa is this: if this person didn't become so preferential of the dunya, as I mentioned before, the quote, and if he didn't follow his hawa, then why Allah would have elevated him up? But those are the two ruinous qualities or two attitudes that were just, destructive. How can you follow Allah's signs, prefer the dunya, and follow your own hawa?
It's similar to the verse. Which verse? فأما من طغى آثر الحياة الدنيا.
That's right. Surah An-Nazi'ah.
Surah An-Nazi'ah. As for those who prefer the worldly life,
إن الجحيم هي المأوى.
Yes, فإن الجحيم هي المأوى. وأما من خاف مقام ربه ونهى النفس عن الهوى فإن الجنة هي المأوى. And those who afraid of standing in front of their Lord and they forbid their hawa, for them is Jannah as their abode. So here we are seeing this concept, this idea of contrasting of preference of dunya over the akhirah.
That's a qarina qati'ah. That's the ayah is a definitive indication that whatever is a condition to enter Jannah, that thing is wajib.
Yes.
So restraining your nafs, controlling your desires is a wajib, is an obligation. We have no choice. We have to control it.
And the other thing is وَاتَّبَعَ hawa. It's contrasting it with, again, should be following the ayats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So revelation and hawa, often in the Quran they come together. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا hawa. Do not follow the hawa. It's often mentioned coupled with wahi and revelation. So that's always in a contrast, that in terms of how we actually live our lives, is it according to revelation or according to our caprice or our vain desires?
And remember yesterday, sorry, we mentioned how Allah can strike similitudes with anything He wants, because the Jews thought it's not befitting for Allah. Allah just mentioned a dog. He just mentioned a dog in a method.
Absolutely.
So forget flies and things like that. He mentioned a dog. Subhanallah, subhanallah. But what's interesting here, for those of you like a bit of balagha, look at the repetition in yalhath.
Yes.
So you tell a dog, if you chase a dog, he just pants there panting there like a dog that's just panting there, doesn't know what's going on. If you leave him, he still pants. So it's like that dumbness, The repetition of yalhath is to show you, just look how pathetic.
So this mathal here, in terms of comparing with a dog, if you chase it or you sort of burden it in some way or form, it will pant, yalhath, or if you just leave it, it will just pant. Now, in terms of, this is an interesting one, because what is it alluding to? What's the aspect, in terms of what's the, why make this comparison with a dog whose state is, whether you are chasing it or whether it's left alone, it's always panting? I mean, I was reading some commentaries and tafsirs that, this is an example of that this dog, its state is always the same, comparing with somebody who has, akhlada ila al-ardi wattaba'a hawahu, is someone who is clinging to the earth and following his desires. That person is never satisfied in whatever state they may be in. And that was one of the observations that was made, that this dog is never satisfied. It's always in that same state, whether you're burdening it, whether you're chasing it, whether you're leaving it alone. It's always in the state of anxiousness or anxiety, and therefore it's always panting. And so therefore the comparison is someone who has abandoned the ayats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and is chasing the dunya and following his hawa and his desires, even though they know the truth, right? They are in a constant state of anxiety and anxiousness, i.e. they're never content or never satisfied. That was one angle as to why this tashbih was made.
Cool.
Any other points regarding the comparison with the dog?
Not on this one at the moment, no.
And the other aspects, obviously, lowliness, because you're comparing it with a dog. That, because, you had such a high maqam, such a high status, which is that, Allah said, if you had stuck to the revelation, وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَرَفَعْنَاهُ بِهَا, we would have, raised your rank. But because you didn't do that, you are now asfal as-safilin, you're worse than the worst. Perhaps even worse than the dog, because the dog only acts out of its whatever qadr that Allah has given, right? It doesn't have a choice, but you have a choice.
What you mentioned there, Ustad, the other tafsir, if I remember, and I don't, if our viewers can probably just double check, to one of the tafsirs was that just like a dog, whatever you say to it, either way, it just sits there panting. The tashbih was supposed to be like, for example, that if the person who was given the ayats of Allah, the wisdom, the knowledge, he doesn't carry it in the way it's supposed to be carried. He doesn't implement it in the way it's supposed to be implemented. So either way, whether he's given the knowledge, he doesn't do what he's supposed to do with it. So he doesn't act on it. So he doesn't do whatever the requirements were that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave that knowledge to that person. The requirements that came with the knowledge, he never fulfilled it. Like a dog who just sat there panting, didn't do anything, just stood still. Can you see? So the person didn't do anything with the hikmah. Can you see? لم يحملها يعني.
It's almost, you know, whether you warn them or we don't warn them,
that's
it
right.
doesn't have any effect. It's like the ayah in Surah Baqarah, إن الذين كفروا سواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم. You know, whether you warn them or you don't warn them, it has no effect on them.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Either way, so whatever you give him, whatever conditions you give him with that knowledge, it doesn't do them. Responsibility of acting on it, implementing it, and so on and so on. So I think, you know, that was one of the ones that I read. So I'll have to check on that. Allah knows best. Allah knows best.
So moving on, ذلك مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآياتنا. So I think here's the concluding. That this is a example of people who belie or rejects the ayats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is again very powerful condemnation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of those people who are people of knowledge and truth and the haqq, but they don't follow it, they don't implement it, they have surrendered it or compromised on it. They are considered those who are kadhabu bi ayatina, those who have denied or disbelieved in our sign. And it's similar to the verse that we discussed, I think, in Surah Al-Jum'ah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the example of those who were entrusted with the Torah, and they are like donkeys. If you recall that parable. Yeah, so that parable, it's the similar language is being used here. I'm trying to remember the verse. مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا. Those who have been charged to implement the Torah but did not do so, they are like donkeys carrying books. بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله. Similar language. You know, how wretched is the example of those who كذبوا بآيات الله. والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. So again, the message is the same here, which is that, you know, those who've been entrusted with knowledge and ilm, if they don't act on it, follow upon it, then they don't benefit from it, and it's considered to be a form of takdhib of the deen. Subhanallah. So these are any other further points to add just on the similes? So in terms of some reflection points, I'll stop in terms of some reflection points, you know, from this, what are some key sort of takeaway points that we can ponder upon and think about?
One thing we could do is obviously to be aware of those who are exploited for their ilm, or those who want to sell out, scholars who want to sell out for the dunya. The ayat, they've got the hikmah, they've got the knowledge, but out of the lack of fear of Allah, they don't, either one, they don't implement enjoin implementing the laws of Allah, the commandments of Allah properly, and they kind of, attempt to change the deen, to change the religion. I mean, unfortunately, we have, ulama like that, and scholars previously.
And that's an important point, isn't it? In terms of, we need to, as Muslims, aware Muslims, recognize there are good, righteous scholars and ulama amongst the Muslims, and there are, unrighteous, evil scholars as well. And that's a reality, that's a fact. It's like in any profession, I guess, you have good doctors and you have quacks, right?
Yeah.
So this is a reality. So I think there is a point, which is that as Muslims, ordinary Muslims, is really important that we actually take knowledge and we follow ulama, scholars, people of knowledge who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who have not compromised Islam, and who do not actually justify oppression. And we nowadays we really suffer from the fitna of scholars who justify corruption and justify munkar, using the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, using Islam. So they will outwardly profess and show their knowledge of Islam and use the ayats and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ to justify the corruption of our rulers, the corruption of occupation, the corruption of wars in our countries on the basis of Islam. And as Muslims, we have to acknowledge this difference. There are scholars who are fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who will stick to the deen, who will not compromise, and there are scholars who have sold their deen for the dunya. And that's an important consideration. And I think that it raises a critical point in terms of where do we get our knowledge from. We should not just get our knowledge from anyone. We should be quite discerning to see, are they worthy of following? Because the most important criteria of following a scholar is not only his ilm, but it's also his justice and his taqwa.
Definitely.
So that's one point. The other point that I had is, seeking knowledge. The aim of seeking knowledge, because worldly aims, dunawi sort of aims, can lead to ruin. So as mentioned in this, particular verse, وَلَكِنَّهُ أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ وَأَتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ. Yeah, they stuck to the world and followed their desires. So there is a question about the intention by which you actually seek knowledge, because you could become the most knowledgeable person, but if your intention and your purpose is not seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is not looking for the hereafter, then what benefit, what value is any of that knowledge?
You're going to be like that dog.
Yeah, so you're going to كَمَثَلِ الْكَلْبِ إِن تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْهِ يَلْهَثْ أَوْ تَتْرُكْهُ يَلْهَثْ. Yeah, you'll be panting. Right, you'll be like this. This is the awful example that's being struck here. So again, I think there's a very important point, not only about scholars, even ourselves as Muslims who are students of knowledge, learning Islam, having the intention why you are seeking knowledge is not to show off, is not for some position, is not to gain some money or to gain some benefits, but it is primarily to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly. And secondly, with that knowledge comes responsibility of enjoining good and forbidding evil. That is a very important criteria, I think, in terms of, often people will ask myself and others, brothers, how do we know which scholar should we follow? And one of the things that I always mention, does that scholar enjoins good and forbids evil? Does it, that is a sign of true scholarship. So if you look at the scholars of the past in Islam, I mean, Imam Ahmad, rahimullah, I mean, he's an exemplary scholar. If you just read his life, that how he stood for Islam, stood for the aqidah of Islam against any deviancy, and he was in prison and he was lashed by the rulers of his time, but he did not compromise. So there you see a great sign of a great scholar, is those who actually stick to the truth no matter what. Any other final points, Ustad?
I think a lot of it was mentioned already in there, in our sort of discussion of the ayat. A lot to ponder.
Yes, it's a very scary ayat. I'm just looking at on the page. Alhamdulillah, good to see Ustad Saf after many years, from a brother called Adil Chowdhury. So I don't know.
Adil. Yeah, hope you're well.
Yeah. So then there's we've got some audience from Sweden, Shohag Mahmoud Saif, and then we have Shabma May Allah protect us from this dumbness. Oh, yeah, okay, dumbness, from this dumbness, or society that sheds Islam. We see more depravity every day. So Jazakallah khair, brothers and sisters, for joining. As usual, share and invite others. And if you've missed any of the previous episodes, then you can catch up on the Quranic Parables Facebook page, where we have listed all of the previous shows. So once again, Jazakallah khair for joining, and we hope to see you tomorrow evening, inshallah, with another amthal from the Quran. So from myself, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
From myself, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس لعلهم يتذكرون